My sister demanded to walk first at my wedding. When I said no, she tripped on purpose and made sure the entire ceremony was ruined. Throw away because my wedding disaster videos went viral on social media and I don't want this connected to my main account. I'm 28F and my sister Victoria is 30F. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but Victoria made sure it became a nightmare that I'll never be able to forget. 6 months later, I'm still processing how someone I loved could deliberately destroy something so important to me. For context, Victoria has always been the center of attention in our family. She's beautiful, charismatic, and has this way of making everything about her without people realizing it's happening. Growing up, I was used to being in her shadow. She was homecoming queen, valedictorian, the daughter my parents bragged about to their friends. I learned early that it was easier to just let Victoria have the spotlight than to compete for it. But my wedding was supposed to be different. For once in my life, I was going to be the star of the show. After years of letting Victoria take center stage, I was finally going to have one day that was completely about me and my fiancé Marcus. Victoria seemed supportive during the engagement. She helped me pick out my dress, offered to help with planning, and acted excited about being my maid of honor. I thought maybe she'd matured enough to let me have my moment without making it about herself. I should have known better. The first red flag came during the rehearsal dinner. Victoria gave a speech that was supposed to be about me and Marcus, but somehow became a 20-minute story about her own relationship experiences and career achievements. She talked about how she'd taught me everything about relationships, and how she was so proud to see her little sister following in her footsteps. When she finally mentioned Marcus and our relationship, it was to tell an embarrassing story about my college dating life and to joke about how she'd had to give me advice to land a good guy. The speech was supposed to celebrate our love story, but Victoria turned it into a platform to position herself as my mentor and superior. Marcus noticed too. Is she always like this? He asked quietly during dinner. Pretty much, I said. But tomorrow is our day. She can't make our actual wedding about herself. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, Victoria came to the bridal suite acting strange and agitated. She kept pacing around, checking her phone, and making comments about the timeline and logistics. Are you sure about the processional order? She asked for the third time. It seems weird to have the bridesmaids walk in order of height instead of importance to the bride. I'd chosen to have my bridesmaids walk in height order simply because it looked most balanced and elegant in photos. Victoria, being the tallest, would walk last before me. My childhood friend Emma, who was the shortest, would walk first. The order is fine, Victoria. We practiced it yesterday. But I'm your maid of honor, she said. Shouldn't I walk last? Shouldn't I be the one to immediately precede the bride? That is the traditional order, my wedding planner Melissa agreed. Usually the maid of honor walks just before the bride to signal that she's coming. I felt pressured to change my plans to accommodate Victoria, but something about her insistence bothered me. Emma had been my best friend since elementary school and had been incredibly supportive throughout the engagement. Victoria had been helpful too, but she'd also made several moments about herself. I want to stick with height order, I said firmly. It's going to look better in photos and videos. Victoria's face darkened. So you care more about photos than honoring the person who's been there for you your whole life? Victoria, you're walking right before me. You're still in the place of honor. I'm walking behind Emma and Sarah, like I'm some random bridesmaid instead of your sister. The guilt trip was classic Victoria. She had a way of making her wants seem like emotional needs and making anyone who denied her seem selfish and uncaring. The order is already planned, I said. Programs are printed, the photographer knows the sequence, everyone has practiced. I'm not changing it now. Victoria got quiet, which should have been another red flag. When Victoria got quiet, it usually meant she was planning something. The ceremony was held at a beautiful outdoor venue with a long stone pathway leading to the altar. The setup was gorgeous, white flowers everywhere, string quartet playing, perfect lighting for photos and video. All our friends and family were seated and waiting. The processional started perfectly. Emma walked down the aisle looking beautiful, followed by my other bridesmaids. The music was lovely, the pace was elegant, and everything was going exactly as rehearsed. Then came Victoria's turn. She started walking down the aisle looking absolutely stunning in her navy bridesmaid dress. For the first half of her walk, everything seemed normal. She was smiling, walking at the right pace, holding her bouquet correctly. But when she reached the halfway point, right in the center of the aisle where everyone could see her clearly, Victoria suddenly stumbled. It wasn't a small trip or a graceful recovery. She went down hard, arms flailing, bouquet flying, landing on her hands and knees on the stone pathway. Her dress hiked up, her hair came loose from its updo, and she let out a loud cry of pain that echoed across the entire venue. The music stopped immediately. Guests gasped and jumped up to help. Marcus started to come down from the altar, thinking there was a genuine emergency. But here's the thing. I was watching from behind the ceremony space, waiting for my cue to walk. I saw Victoria's fall from a different angle than everyone else. I saw her deliberately catch her heel on the hem of her dress. I saw her throw herself forward with way more force than any accidental trip would create. I saw her make sure to fall in the most dramatic, attention-grabbing way possible. Victoria had sabotaged my wedding processional on purpose. But I couldn't prove it. To everyone else, it looked like an unfortunate accident. Victoria was on the ground, crying, apparently injured and embarrassed. She was the victim of a terrible mishap that had ruined the ceremony through no fault of her own. My parents rushed to help her up. The wedding coordinator was trying to figure out if we needed to pause the ceremony. Guests were murmuring and taking photos of the drama. The elegant, romantic atmosphere I'd planned was completely destroyed. Victoria, meanwhile, was milking the situation for everything it was worth. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I ruined Emma's wedding. I'm so clumsy. I can't believe I did this." She was apologizing, but she was also making sure that everyone's attention stayed focused on her. Instead of quietly getting up and moving aside so the ceremony could continue, she was creating a prolonged scene that made recovery impossible. "Are you hurt?" my mom asked, helping Victoria to her feet. "I think I twisted my ankle," Victoria said, leaning heavily on Mom's arm. "And I scraped my hands. I'm bleeding." She was bleeding, but barely, just a few scrapes on her palms from hitting the stone. Nothing that required medical attention, but enough to justify continued drama and concern. Marcus came over to where I was waiting. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "Should we pause until she's okay?" I was faced with an impossible choice. If I insisted on continuing the ceremony while Victoria was injured, I'd look like a bridezilla who cared more about her photos than her sister's well-being. But if we paused, Victoria would have successfully derailed my entire wedding. "Let's just get her cleaned up and continue," I said, trying to stay calm. But the damage was done. The romantic atmosphere was gone. Half the guests were out of their seats, gathered around Victoria. The string quartet didn't know whether to keep playing. The photographer was capturing all the wrong moments. By the time we got Victoria situated and tried to restart the processional, the energy was completely different. People were distracted, whispering about the fall, watching Victoria instead of focusing on the ceremony. When I finally walked down the aisle, I could see people looking back and forth between me and Victoria, who was seated in the front row with a bandaged hand, still sniffling and accepting sympathy from relatives. My grand entrance, the moment I dreamed about since I was little, was upstaged by my sister's accident. The ceremony itself was awkward and disjointed. People kept glancing at Victoria to see how she was doing. She made little wincing motions whenever she moved her injured ankle, drawing attention away from the vows. During the ring exchange, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, which looked to guests like she was crying emotional tears about her sister's wedding. But I knew she was just making sure everyone remembered that she was hurt and brave for staying through the ceremony. The photographer tried his best, but half the processional shots were ruined. Instead of elegant photos of bridesmaids walking down the aisle, we had dramatic images of Victoria falling and being helped up. The video footage was even worse. You could clearly hear the gasp from the crowd and the disruption of the music. But Victoria wasn't done. During the reception, she made sure her injury remained a topic of conversation. She limped noticeably when walking to the head table. She held up her bandaged hand when people asked how she was feeling. She told the story of her fall to anyone who would listen, each time emphasizing how terrible she felt about ruining Emma's big moment. "I just feel so guilty," she told our Aunt Carol loudly enough for me to hear. I tried so hard to be careful, but these heels were just too high for that stone pathway. I should have worn different shoes. She was simultaneously playing the victim and subtly criticizing my venue choice. According to Victoria's narrative, the fall was nobody's fault, but maybe the stone pathway wasn't the safest choice for a wedding processional. During the speeches, Victoria got up to give her maid of honor speech with her bandaged hand prominently displayed. Her speech started with a long story about her fall and how, even a twisted ankle couldn't keep me from celebrating my sister's special day. She positioned herself as the devoted sister who was bravely soldiering through pain to honor her commitment to me. The applause she got for her dedication was louder than anything else that had happened that day. Then she told a story about how she'd always protected me growing up and how she'd always put my needs first. She talked about sacrificing her own interests to help me succeed and how proud she was to see me, finally, finding happiness. The speech was ostensibly about me, but it was really about Victoria's generosity, sacrifice, and strength. She had managed to make my maid of honor speech about what a wonderful person she was. The final insult came during the bouquet toss. I threw my bouquet into the crowd of single women, and it was caught by my cousin Jennifer. But Victoria loudly announced that she couldn't participate because of her ankle, and made a big show of sitting down dramatically. Even my bouquet toss became about Victoria's injury and her noble decision to sit it out rather than risk further harm. By the end of the night, more people had asked me about Victoria's fall than about how I was enjoying my wedding day. The dominant memory of my ceremony wasn't my vows or my dress or my happiness. It was my sister's dramatic accident and brave recovery. Marcus and I left for our honeymoon the next day, but we barely talked about the wedding. There wasn't much to celebrate. Instead of reliving romantic moments and beautiful memories, we were processing the disaster that Victoria had created. "Do you really think she fell on purpose?" Marcus asked during our flight. "I know she did," I said. "But I can't prove it. Why would she do that?" I'd been asking myself the same question. Why would someone sabotage their own sister's wedding over the order of a processional? When we got back from our honeymoon, Victoria's version of events had become family history. She was being praised for her grace under pressure and her dedication to family. Our parents were telling people how proud they were that Victoria had handled the situation with such dignity. "She could have just gone home when she got hurt," my mom said. But she stayed and gave that beautiful speech even though she was in pain. No one suspected that the fall had been intentional. Why would they? Who would deliberately injure themselves and ruin their sister's wedding just to get attention? But I knew Victoria well enough to recognize the pattern. This wasn't the first time she'd created drama when she wasn't the center of attention. In high school, she'd had a panic attack during my graduation speech when I was valedictorian. In college, she'd gotten food poisoning the night before my senior art exhibition and needed me to stay home and take care of her. Victoria had a long history of developing crises when other people were supposed to be celebrated. But this was the most extreme example yet. I tried to talk to her about it a few weeks after the wedding. "Victoria, I need to ask you something about the ceremony," I said during a family dinner. "What happened when you fell? Did you catch your heel on something?" "I honestly don't remember exactly," she said, looking genuinely confused. "It happened so fast. One second I was walking, and the next second I was on the ground. I think my heel got caught in my dress hem, but everything is kind of a blur." She seemed to have convinced herself that the fall was accidental. Either she was a better actress than I'd realized, or she'd genuinely rewritten the memory in her mind. It just seems like such a coincidence that it happened right in the middle of the aisle where everyone could see. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "Are you implying that I fell on purpose? That I deliberately hurt myself and ruined your wedding?" When she put it like that, it sounded crazy. Who would believe that someone had sabotaged their own sister's wedding by throwing themselves onto a stone pathway? "I'm just trying to understand what happened." "What happened is that I had an accident, and instead of being concerned about whether I was okay, you're accusing me of staging it. I can't believe you think I would do something like that." The conversation ended with Victoria in tears, claiming that I was paranoid and looking for someone to blame for my wedding not being perfect. She told our parents that I had accused her of faking her fall, and they were shocked that I would attack my sister when she was already feeling guilty about the accident. I became the villain for suggesting that Victoria might have sabotaged my wedding. According to my family, I was being cruel and paranoid, unable to accept that sometimes accidents happen and weddings don't go perfectly. But I knew what I had seen. Victoria had deliberately destroyed my ceremony because she couldn't handle walking behind two other bridesmaids. She'd rather throw herself onto a stone pathway and injure herself than allow me to have one day where I was the undisputed center of attention. The most maddening part was that her sabotage had worked perfectly. Not only had she ruined my ceremony, but she'd managed to make herself look like the victim and me look like the unreasonable one. 6 months later, people still talk about Victoria's brave performance at my wedding. She's become a family legend for her grace under pressure and her dedication to family loyalty. Meanwhile, my wedding is remembered primarily for the drama and disruption, not for the love Marcus and I were celebrating. I've gone low contact with Victoria since then. I can't trust someone who would deliberately destroy one of the most important days of my life and then gaslight me about it afterward. My parents think I'm being petty and holding a grudge over an accident, but I know the truth. Victoria taught me that some people will literally hurt themselves if that's what it takes to steal your spotlight. She'd rather bleed on a stone pathway than let me have one moment where I was more important than her. I'm planning to elope if Marcus and I ever renew our vows. I'm not giving Victoria another chance to make my celebration about herself. The worst part is that I can never get that moment back. I can never have another first wedding where I walk down the aisle for the first time as a bride. Victoria stole that from me, and she did it on purpose, and she'll never admit it or apologize for it. But at least I learned who she really is. And I learned that some family members will sabotage your happiness if they think it threatens their position as the center of attention. Victoria got what she wanted. Everyone talked about her instead of me on my wedding day. But she also lost her sister, because I'll never trust her with anything important again. I just wish I'd seen it coming. I wish I'd been brave enough to have security remove her when she started making demands about the processional order. I wish I'd protected my wedding day from someone who cared more about her own ego than my happiness. But now I know better. And if anyone reading this has a family member who always needs to be the center of attention, please protect your important moments from them. They'll find a way to make it about themselves, even if they have to hurt themselves and you in the process.